The first contact happened on a Tuesday morning, which seemed almost too ordinary for such a monumental event. Commander Jake Morrison was drinking his third cup of coffee aboard the orbital. Station New Horizon when the sensors picked up something massive dropping out of faster-than-light travel just beyond the moon's orbit. The ship was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. It stretched nearly 2 kilometers from end to end, shaped like a massive crystalline flower with petals that seemed to shift colors in the sunlight. The hull appeared to be made of something between metal and glass, and it pulsed with soft blue light from within. Every nation on Earth went on high alert. Every defense satellite powered up. Every military command center started running worst-case scenarios. Then the aliens sent a message. It came through on every communication frequency simultaneously, translated into every human language with perfect accuracy. The message was simple and direct. They were called the Valori. They came in peace. They wished to speak with Earth's leaders about a matter of mutual interest. They requested permission to send a delegation to the orbital station. Jake had been chosen to lead humanity's response team for exactly this kind of scenario, though nobody really believed it would ever happen. He was a career military officer who had spent the last decade in space, managing international cooperation on the lunar colonies and orbital facilities. He was calm under pressure, diplomatic when needed, and practical above all else. Standing next to him would be Dr. Lisa Warren, one of Earth's leading physicists specializing in energy systems and quantum mechanics. The Valori shuttle arrived 6 hours later. It was smaller than their main ship, but still impressive, about the size of a commercial airliner but moving with impossible grace. It docked with New Horizon without any visible thrusters or propulsion system. The airlock pressurized. The door opened. The Valori were tall. The first one through the door stood nearly 8 feet high, with long limbs that moved with fluid precision. Their skin had a faint iridescent quality, shifting between shades of blue and green depending on the angle of light. They had 4 fingers on each hand, and their faces were angular with large eyes that seemed to see everything at once. They wore robes that appeared to be woven from light itself, constantly shifting patterns across the fabric. The lead Valori stepped forward and performed what looked like a formal bow. When it spoke, the words came from a small device attached to its robe, translating its language into perfect English. I am Kelthvar, ambassador and senior engineer of the Valori Collective. I bring greetings from 12 worlds and the accumulated wisdom of 50,000 years of civilization. We come to Earth seeking consultation. Jake extended his hand carefully, and Kelthvar studied it for a moment before reaching out to grasp it gently. The alien's skin felt warm and slightly textured like smooth stone. Welcome to New Horizon, Jake said. I'm Commander Jake Morrison. This is Dr. Lisa Warren. We're honored by your visit, though I'll admit we're curious about what kind of consultation you need from us. Kelthvar released Jake's hand and straightened to full height. For a long moment, the alien seemed to struggle with what to say next. Finally, it spoke. We have a problem. A significant engineering challenge that threatens the foundation of our civilization. For 5,000 of your years, our greatest minds have worked to solve it. Thousands of engineers across multiple generations have dedicated their lives to finding an answer. We have failed. Every solution we implement provides only temporary relief before the problem returns, often worse than before. Lisa leaned forward, her scientific curiosity immediately engaged. What kind of problem are we talking about? Kelthvar gestured, and suddenly holographic images filled the air between them. Jake saw massive structures floating in space, networks of light connecting planets and stations, energy flowing like rivers between the stars. It was beautiful and terrifying in its complexity. This is our quantum lattice energy network. It powers everything in our civilization. Every world, every station, every ship depends on it. The network uses quantum entanglement to distribute energy across vast distances instantaneously. It was designed during our golden age of expansion, nearly 5,000 years ago, and it has served us well. The hologram shifted, showing red warnings spreading across the network like a disease. 3,000 years ago, we began experiencing cascade failures, small at first, affecting only minor stations. But they have grown worse over time. In the last century alone, we have lost 17 stations. The failures follow no pattern we can predict. Our most advanced algorithms cannot determine the cause. Each time we believe we have found a solution, the failures begin again in a different location. Jake studied the hologram, though most of the technical details were beyond his understanding. "I'm sorry for your losses, but I'm not sure how we can help. Our technology is centuries behind yours. We've barely figured out fusion power. Quantum entanglement is still mostly theoretical for us." Kelthvar's large eyes fixed on Jake, and there was something in that gaze that made the commander uncomfortable. It was the look of someone swallowing their pride. "Precisely. You are young. Your civilization has existed for mere thousands of years compared to ours. You have not yet developed the deep specialization that comes with age. We have consulted with 3 other spacefaring species. All of them offered the same solutions we have already tried. They think like us because they are like us, ancient and set in their ways," Lisa spoke up. "You want a fresh perspective. Someone who doesn't know enough to be trapped by the same assumptions you are." "Exactly," Kelthvar said. "It is humbling to admit, but we believe our expertise has become our limitation. We are too close to the problem, too invested in our existing solutions. We need someone who can look at our work and see what we cannot. Someone who might ask the simple questions we stopped asking millennia ago." Jake exchanged a glance with Lisa. He could see the excitement in her eyes, the pull of a mystery that had stumped an alien civilization for thousands of years. But he also saw the calculation happening behind that excitement. This was a test in a way. Humanity's first real interaction with an advanced alien species, and they were being asked to prove their worth. "What exactly are you asking from us?" Jake said carefully. Kelthvar's translator gave a sound that might have been a sigh. "We request that you send a small team of your engineers and scientists to our homeworld. They will be given full access to our technical data, our facilities, and our engineering teams. They will observe, consult, and offer any insights they may have. We understand this is an unusual request. We are willing to offer significant compensation in the form of technology exchange and formal diplomatic relations." Lisa couldn't contain herself any longer. "I'll go. Whatever team you're putting together, I want to be on it." Jake smiled slightly. He had expected that reaction. Lisa had spent her entire career pushing the boundaries of human understanding and physics. Being handed 5,000 years of alien engineering data would be like Christmas morning for her. "Let me discuss this with Earth's leadership. But speaking personally, I think we'd be foolish to turn down this opportunity. When would you need our team?" "As soon as possible," Kelthvar said. "We lost another station 3 days ago. 12,000 Velori had to be evacuated. The cascade failures are accelerating. We estimate we have perhaps a decade before critical systems begin failing on our homeworld itself." The weight of that statement settled over the room. This wasn't just an academic exercise. An entire civilization was slowly dying, and they were desperate enough to ask a primitive species for help. Jake felt the pressure of that responsibility, but also a strange sense of opportunity. Humanity had spent decades wondering if they were alone in the universe, and now they had a chance to prove their value to an ancient alien civilization. "Give us 48 hours, Jake said. "We'll put together our best team and get back to you with an answer." Kelthvar performed another bow. "That is acceptable. We will remain in orbit and await your response. Thank you, Commander Morrison, Dr. Warren. We know this is an unusual situation. We are grateful for your consideration." After the Velori delegation returned to their shuttle, Jake and Lisa stood in the observation deck, watching the massive alien ship hanging in space beyond the moon. Earth was a blue and white marble in the distance, unaware that everything had just changed. "Do you really think we can help them?" Jake asked quietly. Lisa was silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on the Velori ship. "I don't know, but I think we have to try. This is bigger than just solving their problem. This is humanity's chance to show we belong out here, that we're more than just primitive newcomers. And honestly, I'm dying to see what 5,000 years of alien engineering looks like." Jake nodded slowly. "Then let's put together a team. We'll need an engineer, a mathematician, and maybe a systems analyst. People who can think outside the box and aren't afraid to challenge assumptions." "I know just the people," Lisa said, a smile spreading across her face. The next 48 hours would be a whirlwind of briefings, approvals, and preparations. But standing there in that moment, Jake felt a strange certainty. Humanity was about to embark on its first real adventure among. Danny Cooper had been working on a fusion reactor redesign in Nevada when he got the call. At first, he thought it was a joke. Someone claiming to be from the United Nations Space Command, asking if he would be interested in consulting for an alien civilization. He had almost hung up before they sent him the security clearances and video footage of the Velori ship. Now he sat in a Valori vessel with 3 other humans, watching Earth shrink behind them as they accelerated toward speeds that should have been impossible. The ship didn't shake or vibrate. There was no sense of movement at all. They simply watched through the transparent walls as stars began to stretch and bend, and then everything went white for a moment. When normal space returned, Earth was gone and an unfamiliar star blazed ahead of them. Amy Rodriguez sat across from Danny, her tablet covered in equations she had been working through for the past hour. She was a mathematician who specialized in complex systems analysis, someone who could look at massive data sets and find patterns nobody else saw. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes had the intense focus of someone solving a puzzle in their head. Next to Amy was Greg Palmer, a systems analyst who had spent 20 years working on Earth's global infrastructure networks. He was older than the rest of them, probably in his 50s, with gray at his temples and the calm demeanor of someone who had seen every kind of technical disaster imaginable. He was reading through Valori technical documentation on his tablet, occasionally making notes. Lisa sat near the front of the passenger compartment, talking quietly with their Valori escort, a younger engineer named Miraketh. Even among the tall Valori, Miraketh stood out as particularly enthusiastic. She had volunteered to accompany the human team and had spent most of the journey trying to explain Valori technology in terms the humans could understand. The journey took 3 weeks. The Valori ship made several jumps through what they called fold space, each one bringing them hundreds of light years closer to the Valori homeworld of Thelnor. During those weeks, the human team studied. They reviewed technical documentation that had been accumulated over 5,000 years. They watched simulations of the cascade failures. They learned the basics of quantum lattice theory and how the Valori had managed to create stable energy networks across interstellar distances. It was overwhelming. Every time Danny thought he understood something, he would dig deeper and find 10 more layers of complexity beneath it. The Valori approach to engineering was meticulous to the point of obsession. Every component had been designed, tested, and optimized countless times. Every calculation had been verified by multiple independent teams. The documentation alone filled databases that would take a human centuries to fully read. When they finally arrived at Thelnor, Danny pressed his face against the transparent wall and just stared. The planet was beautiful, covered in crystalline cities that caught the sunlight and scattered it in rainbow colors. Orbital stations hung in perfect geometric patterns around the world, connected by visible streams of energy that flowed between them like luminous highways. The quantum lattice network was visible even from space, a web of light that connected everything. They landed at the Central Engineering Sanctum, a facility that covered nearly 100 square miles on the planet's surface. It was built into the side of a mountain range, with massive towers rising toward the sky and equally massive chambers carved into the rock below. Thousands of Valori worked here, all dedicated to maintaining and improving the network that powered their entire civilization. Sorath Tin met them at the landing platform. He was older than Kelthvar, his iridescent skin showing patterns that the humans had learned indicated advanced age among the Valori. He held the title of lead network engineer, a position he had occupied for over 200 years. His greeting was formal and cold. "Welcome to Thelnor," Sorath Tin said through his translator. "We appreciate your willingness to offer consultation. However, I want to be clear about expectations. This problem has defeated the finest minds of our civilization for 50 centuries. We do not expect you to solve it. We simply hope you might offer a perspective we have not yet considered." Lisa stepped forward. "We understand. We're not here to claim we're smarter than you. We're just here to look at the problem with fresh eyes." Sorath Tin's large eyes studied her for a moment, and Danny got the distinct impression the alien was skeptical about the entire arrangement. "Very well, follow me. I will show you the heart of our network." They descended into the mountain through corridors that seemed to be carved from solid crystal. Lights pulsed through the walls carrying data or energy or both. The Valori they passed stopped to stare at the humans, their expressions unreadable but their curiosity obvious. Humans were a novelty here, a primitive species that had barely left their own solar system. The central chamber took Danny's breath away. It was enormous, easily a mile across and hundreds of feet high. Crystalline nodes the size of buildings rose from the floor, each one humming with power. Energy flowed between them in visible streams of light, splitting and recombining in patterns too complex to follow. Thousands of Valori engineers worked at stations throughout the chamber, monitoring data feeds and adjusting parameters. This is the primary nexus for our home system, Sorath Tin explained. From here, energy is distributed to 47 planetary installations, 300 orbital stations, and countless smaller facilities. The network operates using quantum entanglement pairs established during construction. Energy injected at any point in the network can be extracted at any other point instantaneously, regardless of distance. Amy was already taking notes, her fingers flying across her tablet. How do you handle the quantum decoherence? Entangled pairs shouldn't be stable over these distances. For the first time, Sorath Tin showed something like approval. An intelligent question. We use recursive stabilization fields that constantly refresh the entanglement. The fields themselves are quantum locked to prevent interference. It is one of our civilization's greatest achievements. Over the next 10 hours, Sorath Tin walked them through the technical details. He showed them the failure logs, thousands upon thousands of incidents spanning centuries. He demonstrated their predictive algorithms, which used quantum computing to model billions of possible scenarios. He presented their solutions, each one more elaborate than the last, each one ultimately failing to stop the cascade failures. Danny's head was spinning by the time they took a break. The sheer complexity of what the Valori had built was staggering. Every problem he could think of, they had already solved. Every question he wanted to ask, they had already answered. It was humbling and frustrating at the same time. But something was nagging at him. As they toured the facility, he kept noticing small details that didn't quite fit. Junction points where older equipment connected to newer systems showed slight energy fluctuations. The failure logs, when viewed chronologically, showed a pattern of cascades always starting at connection points between different generations of technology. Greg seemed to notice the same thing. During a demonstration of their fault-tolerance systems, he asked, "When was the last major expansion of the network?" Sorath Tin tilted his head in a gesture the humans had learned indicated thought. "We completed our final expansion approximately 3,000 years ago. Since then, the network has been in maintenance mode. We stopped expanding when we reached our optimal territorial boundaries. And the cascade failures started around that same time?" Greg pressed. "Approximately, yes. Though we do not believe the timing is significant. The network was designed to function indefinitely, whether expanding or stable." Amy spoke up from where she had been studying data on her tablet. "But systems behave differently when they're growing versus when they're static. An open system and a closed system follow different rules. Did you adjust the network protocols when you stopped expanding?" Sorath Tin's expression, difficult as it was to read on an alien face, suggested he found the question odd. The protocols were designed to be universal. They functioned correctly regardless of network state. We saw no need to modify them. Danny exchanged glances with Lisa. She had clearly noticed the same thing he had. The Valori were so confident in their original design that they hadn't considered fundamental changes to operating parameters. Why would they? The network had worked perfectly for 2,000 years before the problems started. The tour continued. They saw backup systems and redundancy protocols. They watched simulations of cascade failures, the way problems spread through the network like ripples in water. They met dozens of Valori engineers, each one a specialist in some aspect of the network, each one having dedicated years or decades to solving this problem. As the day wore on, a picture started forming in Danny's mind. The Valori were brilliant, no question about that. But they were brilliant in a very specific way. They had built their network using principles established 5,000 years ago, and those principles had become almost sacred. Every solution they tried was built on top of those original assumptions. Nobody questioned the foundation because the foundation was proven to work. But what if the foundation itself was the problem? The second day at the Central Engineering Sanctum was even more intense than the first. Sorath Tin had arranged for the human team to meet with specialists from every department involved in maintaining the quantum lattice network. There were power distribution experts, quantum entanglement theorists, failure analysis teams, and predictive algorithm designers. Each one presented their work in exhaustive detail. Danny sat through a 4-hour presentation on quantum field stabilization techniques that made his head hurt. The Valori engineer, whose name translated roughly to Wavekeeper, explained with passionate intensity how they had developed 17 different approaches to maintaining quantum coherence across interstellar distances. Each approach was more sophisticated than the last, building on thousands of years of incremental improvement. But Danny kept coming back to the same nagging thought. All of these solutions were treating symptoms, not causes. They were finding better ways to stabilize a system that was fundamentally unstable because of how it was being used, not because of any flaw in the technology itself. During a brief break between presentations, Danny tried to raise this concern with one of the Valori engineers.
Have you considered that maybe the network protocols themselves might need updating?
Not the hardware, but the fundamental operating assumptions. The Valori, a younger engineer named Kethral, looked at Danny with something that might have been confusion. The protocols were designed by our greatest minds during the Golden Age. They have been proven mathematically sound. Why would we change perfection? Because situations change, Danny tried to explain. What works perfectly in one context might not work as well in another. Kethral seemed to consider this, but then another engineer called them back to the presentation hall. The moment passed and Danny was left frustrated. The Valori were so certain of their foundational work that questioning it felt almost like heresy to them. Lisa was having similar experiences. She spent the morning with the quantum mechanics team, brilliant scientists who had pushed the boundaries of entanglement theory further than humanity had dreamed possible. But when she suggested that some of their equations might have become unnecessarily complex through generations of patches and updates, they looked at her like she had suggested the sun might stop shining. Every addition to our equations has been necessary, the lead theorist explained patiently, as if talking to a child. We do not add complexity for its own sake. Each term addresses a specific phenomenon we observed in the network. I understand that, Lisa said carefully. But sometimes when you keep adding terms to an equation to match observations, you lose sight of the underlying principles. Maybe there's a simpler formulation that would work better. The theorist's response was polite but firm. Simplicity is desirable, but accuracy is essential. Our equations predict network behavior with 97% accuracy. That is acceptable performance. Amy spent her morning with the data analysis team, and she came away looking both impressed and troubled. The Valori had developed predictive algorithms of stunning sophistication, quantum computers that could model billions of possible failure scenarios simultaneously. But when she dug into the actual code, she found layer upon layer of patches and modifications, each one added to address a specific problem that had emerged over the centuries. It's like an archaeological dig, Amy told Greg during a brief moment when they crossed paths in a corridor. You can see the history of the network in the code. Every generation of engineers added their own solutions on top of what came before. Nobody ever went back and cleaned it up or reconsidered the fundamentals. Greg nodded grimly. He had spent his morning touring older sections of the network, facilities that had been built during the original expansion period. He had noticed something interesting. The oldest equipment, when examined in isolation, worked perfectly. The newest equipment, also in isolation, worked perfectly. It was when they interfaced with each other that problems emerged. They're running 3,000-year-old hardware with 5,000-year-old software, all connected to modern systems using protocols that were designed for completely different circumstances, Greg said, and they're so focused on making each individual piece work better that they're not seeing the systemic issues. By the time lunch came around, all four humans were mentally exhausted. The Valori didn't really do lunch breaks. They worked until they felt the need for nutrients, consumed a supplement, and went back to work. But they had learned that humans needed regular meal breaks and had provided a small dining area in the guest quarters. Danny practically ran back to their quarters when Sorathtin announced a break in the schedule. He needed food, coffee, and a chance to process everything they had been seeing. The others arrived shortly after, all looking similarly overwhelmed. Lisa had packed sandwiches that morning using supplies from Earth. Nothing fancy, just bread and protein and vegetables. But after hours of alien architecture and incomprehensible technology, the simple familiarity of a sandwich felt like a blessing. Danny grabbed one and dropped into a chair with a groan. I can't take another presentation, he said. My brain is full. If one more Valori engineer shows me another brilliantly complex solution to a problem they don't fully understand, I'm going to scream. They do understand it, Amy said, biting into her own sandwich. That's almost the problem. They understand every individual piece so well that they can't step back and see the whole picture. Greg was making coffee, and the smell filled the small room. It was such a normal human thing that Danny felt some of his stress melting away. This was what they needed. Not more data, not more presentations, but time to just think and process. Okay, Lisa said, settling into a chair with her sandwich and a cup of coffee. Let's just talk through what we've seen. No pressure, no formal analysis. Just four people trying to make sense of an impossible situation. Danny started with his observations about the interface protocols. Every time he had seen a connection point between old and new equipment, there were small energy fluctuations. Nothing major, nothing that would trigger alarms, but they were there. And the failure logs showed that cascade events almost always originated at these connection points. The old equipment is trying to talk to new equipment using protocols that have evolved over thousands of years. Danny explained. It's like trying to run a modern computer program on hardware from 50 years ago. Technically, it might work, but there are going to be compatibility issues. Amy pulled out her tablet, unable to help herself. Even during lunch, her mind was working on the problem. And those compatibility issues are creating stress points in the network. Small inefficiencies that accumulate over time until something breaks. But why is it getting worse? Lisa asked. If it's a compatibility issue, shouldn't it have been a constant problem from the beginning? Greg set down his coffee cup with a thoughtful expression. Because the network is static now. When it was expanding, there was always somewhere for excess energy to flow. New stations coming online, new connections being established. The system was designed with that assumption built in. But 3,000 years ago, they stopped expanding. Suddenly, there's nowhere for that excess to go. Amy's fingers were flying across her tablet now, pulling up data files and running quick calculations. Oh wow, look at this. The original network protocols allocate buffer resources for potential expansion. They reserve capacity for connections that might be added. But those connections never came. The buffers are full. The reserved capacity is unused, and it's creating pressure points throughout the system. It's like breathing in but never breathing out, Lisa said suddenly. The network keeps preparing for expansion that never happens. Energy and resources get allocated and reserved but never used. Over time, the pressure builds until something ruptures. Danny leaned forward, his sandwich forgotten. And every solution the Valori have tried just adds more complexity on top of the existing problem. They're treating cascade failures as isolated incidents, but they're actually symptoms of a fundamental design mismatch. The four of them looked at each other, and Danny could see the same realization dawning on all their faces. They had found something. It wasn't just a theory or a guess. It was a genuine insight into a problem that had stumped an entire civilization for millennia. Amy was already building a simulation on her tablet, her mathematical mind translating their discussion into formal models. If I'm right about this, I should be able to demonstrate it. Give me a few minutes. They ate in relative silence while Amy worked, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that came from a team that had found its rhythm. Danny finished his sandwich and grabbed another, suddenly aware of how hungry he had been. Greg refilled everyone's coffee. Lisa paced the small room, working through quantum mechanics equations in her head. After about 20 minutes, Amy looked up from her tablet with wide eyes. It works. The math works. If you model the network as a closed system instead of an open system, the cascade failures make perfect sense. The protocols are optimized for infinite growth potential, but they're operating in a finite static environment. It's creating feedback loops that amplify small inefficiencies into major failures. Getting a meeting with Sorath-Tin and his senior engineering council was easier than Danny expected. The lead engineer seemed curious about what the human team wanted to present, though his tone suggested he expected it to be a waste of time. Still, they had been invited here as consultants, so the Valori were willing to hear them out. The presentation chamber was intimidating. It was a circular room with a raised platform in the center, where the humans would stand. Around them, rising in tiers like an ancient amphitheater, were seats for the Valori Engineering Council. 40 of the most senior engineers in their civilization, each one having spent centuries working on this problem. Their large eyes watched the humans with expressions that ranged from polite interest to barely concealed skepticism. Sorath-Tin sat at the highest tier, positioned directly across from the presentation platform. Dr. Warren, you requested this meeting to present your findings. We are ready to hear what insights you have gathered during your time with us. Lisa stepped forward, her tablet in hand. Danny, Amy, and Greg stood slightly behind her, ready to support but letting her take the lead. She had the best mix of technical knowledge and diplomatic skill for this moment. "Thank you for meeting with us," Lisa began. "We want to start by acknowledging the incredible achievement your network represents. The quantum lattice is a masterpiece of engineering, and the technical sophistication involved is far beyond anything humanity has attempted. We have learned a tremendous amount from studying your work." A few of the Vylori shifted in their seats, the body language suggesting they were pleased by the acknowledgement, but still waiting for the actual content. Lisa took a breath and continued. "However, we have noticed something in our analysis, a pattern that might explain the cascade failures you've been experiencing." She gestured, and holographic displays appeared in the air around her, showing data from the network. The failures consistently originate at junction points where equipment from different time periods interfaces, older systems connecting to newer ones. One of the council members, an engineer named Vothkir, spoke up. "We are aware of this pattern. We have implemented extensive compatibility protocols to ensure smooth operation between generations of equipment." "We know," Amy said, stepping forward to join Lisa. "And those protocols are excellent. But we think the issue goes deeper than equipment compatibility. It's about the fundamental operating assumptions built into the network's core protocols." Sorathtin leaned forward slightly. "Explain." Amy brought up her simulations on the holographic display. "The network was designed during your expansion period. The core protocols allocate resources and manage energy distribution based on the assumption of continuous growth. They reserve capacity for new connections, create buffer zones for potential expansion, and optimize for a system that's constantly adding new nodes." "This is correct," Sorathtin confirmed. "The network was designed to grow with our civilization. But you stopped expanding 3,000 years ago," Greg added. "The network went from being an open system, constantly growing and evolving, to being a closed system with fixed boundaries. But the protocols never changed to reflect that new reality." Lisa could see confusion rippling through the council. Several engineers were already shaking their heads. One of them, whose name translated to Pattern Weaver, spoke with clear disagreement in his tone. "Our protocols are mathematically optimized. They function correctly regardless of whether the network is expanding or static. The mathematics do not change based on growth patterns." "The mathematics don't change," Lisa agreed, "but the practical implications do. In an expanding network, there's always somewhere for excess energy to flow, always new capacity coming online to absorb inefficiencies. In a closed network, those inefficiencies accumulate because there's nowhere for them to go." Danny pulled up more data, showing energy distribution patterns over time. "Look at these buffer zones your protocols create. They're reserving capacity for expansion that never comes. That reserved energy has to go somewhere, so it cycles back through the system. Over centuries, these cycles create interference patterns that amplify small inefficiencies into major problems." Sorathtin studied the data with an expression that was hard to read. "You are suggesting that our core protocols are flawed? The same protocols that functioned perfectly for 2,000 years before problems began?" "Not flawed," Lisa said carefully. "Mismatched. They were perfect for the circumstances they were designed for. But circumstances changed. What you're experiencing now is essentially a legacy system problem. The foundation of your network was built for a different reality than the one you're currently operating in." The reaction was immediate and negative. Multiple council members began speaking at once, their translators creating a confusing mix of objections. The phrases "mathematically proven," "tested over millennia," and "fundamentally sound" came through clearly. Sorathtin raised a hand and the chamber fell silent, but the disapproval was obvious. "You are asking us to believe that 5,000 years of accumulated expertise is wrong?" Sorathtin's tone was cold. "That countless generations of the finest engineers in our civilization all failed to notice a fundamental flaw in our approach?" "Not wrong," Greg said firmly, "and not a flaw. This is something we've dealt with extensively in human infrastructure development. Organizations build systems that work perfectly for their needs at the time. But then needs change. Technology advances and the original system becomes less optimal. It's not that anyone did anything wrong. It's just that maintaining and patching an old system eventually becomes less effective than rebuilding with current requirements in mind." Vothkir spoke with clear irritation. Your species has barely achieved interstellar travel. You understand quantum mechanics only in the most basic theoretical sense. And you presume to tell us that we have been approaching this problem incorrectly for millennia? Danny felt his frustration building. They had solid evidence, good math, and a logical explanation that fit all the observed data. But the Vylori were so invested in their existing approach that they couldn't even consider alternatives. With respect, that's exactly why you asked us here. You wanted someone who wasn't locked into your way of thinking, someone who could see things you might have missed. We invited you hoping for minor insights, another council member said. Small perspectives that might help us refine our existing solutions. Not to have you question the very foundation of our most important technology. Amy had been working on her tablet during the exchange. Now she projected a new simulation into the holographic space. Then let me show you something. This is a model of your network using current protocols. The simulation ran, showing the cascade failures spreading through the system exactly as they had been observed in reality. Now watch what happens when I modify the core protocols to treat the network as a closed system rather than an open one. The simulation reset and ran again. This time the same initial conditions that had triggered cascade failures in the first run simply dissipated harmlessly. Energy flows redistributed naturally. Buffer zones that had been creating interference patterns instead maintained stable reserves. The network operated smoothly. That is a simulation, Sorath-Tin pointed out. Simplified and theoretical. Reality is far more complex. Of course it is, Amy agreed. But the simulation uses your own data, your own network topology, your own energy distribution patterns. The only thing I changed was the fundamental operating assumption. Instead of optimizing for growth potential, optimize for stable operation in a fixed configuration. Lisa could see that some of the council members were actually considering the simulation seriously. They were engineers, after all. Evidence and mathematical proof meant something to them, even if it challenged their assumptions. But Sorath-Tin and the older members seemed unmoved. Even if your theory has merit, Pattern Weaver said, implementing such changes would be incredibly disruptive. We would essentially need to rewrite the core protocols that govern the entire network. During that process, we would be vulnerable to catastrophic failures. Not if you do it carefully, Greg said. You don't have to change everything at once. You could implement the new protocols in a test environment first. A decommissioned station or isolated section of the network. Prove the concept works in practice, then gradually roll it out to the full network. Sorath-Tin stood, his tall form commanding attention. This council has heard your presentation. We will deliberate on what you have shown us. But I will be honest with you. The proposal you suggest represents a fundamental challenge to 5,000 years of established practice. Many on this council will be reluctant to accept such a radical departure from proven methods. Lisa nodded, understanding the political reality. They weren't just asking the Vylori to change their technical approach. They were asking them to admit that their greatest achievement had a fundamental design issue that had gone unnoticed for centuries. That was a difficult thing for any civilization to accept, especially one as old and proud as the Vylori. We understand, Lisa said, but we would like to request one thing. Give us access to a decommissioned station. Let us implement our proposed. The decommissioned research station, designated as Testing Facility 7, floated in the dark silence of the outer system, 3 billion miles from Thelnor. It had been one of the Vylori's premier research installations before the cascade failures made it too unstable to operate safely. Now it hung dormant, its crystalline structures dark and cold, waiting to serve one final purpose. Danny stood in the station's main engineering bay, looking up at the quantum lattice nodes that rose like frozen trees toward the ceiling. Even powered down, they were beautiful, catching the light from portable work lamps and scattering it in rainbow patterns. But they were also intimidating. This was the moment where theory met reality, where simulations and lunch table calculations had to become actual, working solutions. The human team had been working on the station for 4 weeks now. They had been joined by a small group of Vylori engineers willing to try the unconventional approach. Miraketh had brought 3 of her colleagues, all younger engineers who were less invested in the established methods and more curious about new possibilities. Together, the mixed team had been slowly dismantling and understanding the station's network. Lisa was deep in the station's computer systems, working with one of the Vylori engineers named Tharsol, on mapping out the existing protocols. They had discovered that the documentation, while extensive, didn't fully match what was actually running on the station. Centuries of patches and updates had created drift between the official records and actual implementation. "This is what I was worried about," Lisa said, staring at lines of code that scrolled across her display. "Nobody fully understands what this system is actually doing anymore. It's been modified so many times that it's become its own unique variant." Tharsol's large eyes studied the code with her. He had been skeptical at first, but as they dug deeper into the system, he began to understand what the humans had been talking about. "This is disturbing. How can we maintain a system we do not fully comprehend?" "You can't, really," Lisa admitted. "That's part of the problem. Every generation of engineers added their solutions without fully documenting the implications. Eventually, the system becomes too complex for anyone to hold in their head all at once." Amy was working in another section of the station with Miraketh, building the new protocol framework from scratch. Rather than trying to modify the existing protocols, they had decided to write new ones based on current requirements. It was more work up front, but it meant they could design everything with a clear understanding of how the pieces fit together. "The hard part is making sure we account for everything the old protocols did," Amy explained as she worked. "We can't just simplify for the sake of simplifying. We need to make sure every legitimate function is preserved, even as we eliminate the unnecessary complexity." Miraketh was fascinated by the human approach. They worked quickly, sometimes making decisions based on intuition rather than exhaustive analysis. They were willing to try things and adjust based on results rather than trying to predict every possible outcome before taking action. It was so different from how she had been trained, but she was beginning to see the value in it. "You do not fear making mistakes," Miraketh observed. Amy looked up from her work with a smile. "Oh, we fear it, but we fear not trying more. On Earth we have a saying, you can't steer a ship that isn't moving. Sometimes you have to start going in a direction before you know if it's the right direction. Then you adjust course as you learn." Greg was working on the physical connections between different sections of the station, making sure the hardware interfaces would support the new protocols. This was tedious work, checking and rechecking thousands of connections, but it was essential. The best software in the universe wouldn't help if the hardware wasn't configured correctly. He was working with a Valori engineer named Keth Rill, who specialized in hardware systems. Together they discovered several interesting things about how the station had evolved over time. Modifications had been made to accommodate new equipment, but those modifications had been done with the assumption that the old protocols would remain unchanged. "Look at this junction," Greg said, pointing to a connection point between two quantum nodes. "This was upgraded about 1,000 years ago, but they kept the old buffer configuration. The hardware can handle direct energy transfer, but the software is still routing everything through a buffer that's no longer necessary." Kethrill studied the setup with growing understanding. "We made the hardware more efficient, but we did not simplify the protocols to match. We added capability without removing complexity." "Exactly. And when you do that over and over across thousands of connection points, you end up with a system that's fighting itself." Danny was coordinating the overall effort, making sure all the pieces would work together. When they finally tried to bring the station back online, it was like conducting an orchestra, keeping track of what everyone was doing and making sure they were all working toward the same goal. He held daily meetings where the whole team would share progress and challenges. The meetings were interesting because they highlighted the cultural differences between human and Valori approaches. The humans would throw out ideas quickly, building on each other's thoughts in rapid-fire conversation. The Valori would listen carefully, consider thoroughly, and then respond with detailed analysis. At first, it had been frustrating for both groups, but as the weeks went on, they learned to work together, combining human creativity with Valori precision. "What's our biggest risk right now?" Danny asked during one of these meetings. Lisa answered immediately. "Unknown dependencies. There might be systems relying on the old protocols in ways that aren't documented. When we switch over, we could break something we didn't know existed." "Can we test for that?" Danny asked. "Not completely," Amy said, "but we can do extensive simulation work. I've been building models of every subsystem we've documented. If there are major dependencies, they should show up in testing." Miraketh added a Valori perspective. "We should also implement the changes gradually. Bring systems online one at a time rather than all at once. If something breaks, We will know exactly which change caused it. The team agreed on that approach. Safety and caution were important, even when trying something new. They spent another week running simulations, testing individual components and preparing for the actual implementation. The pressure was building. News of their work had spread through the Valori engineering community, and opinions were divided. Some saw it as a promising new approach. Others saw it as a waste of time at best, dangerous at worst. Sarathton visited the station during the 5th week. He toured the facility with his usual critical eye, asking detailed questions about every aspect of their work. Danny could tell the lead engineer was still skeptical, but there was also something else in his demeanor. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe just the hope that, after so many years of failure, someone might finally have found an answer. "When will you be ready to test?" Sarathton asked. "Another week," Danny replied. "We want to make absolutely sure everything is ready before we power up. Time is a luxury we may not have." Another cascade failure occurred yesterday on Station 47. We lost power to 2 million inhabitants for 6 hours before backup systems stabilized the grid. The weight of that settled over the group. This wasn't just an academic exercise. People were depending on them to succeed. An entire civilization was slowly failing, and they might be the only ones who could stop it. "We'll be ready in a week," Danny said firmly, "and when we test it will work." Sarathton studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I hope you are correct, Commander Cooper." The final week was intense. They worked around the clock, triple-checking every connection, every line of code, every protocol setting. The Valori engineers were learning to embrace the human concept of good enough, while the humans were learning to appreciate the Valori insistence on thoroughness. The hybrid approach was proving more effective than either method alone. Finally, the day came. The entire engineering council had gathered remotely to observe the test. Kelthvar was present in person, having traveled to the station to witness the moment firsthand. The viewing gallery overlooking the main engineering bay was packed with Valori and human observers. Danny stood at the main control console with Lisa beside him. Amy and Greg were positioned at secondary stations, ready to monitor their respective systems. The Valori engineers were at their own stations, ready to shut everything down instantly if something went wrong. "All systems are showing green," Lisa reported, checking her displays one final time. "Hardware connections are solid. New protocols are loaded and ready to activate. Simulations all predict stable operation," Amy added. "We're as ready as we're going to be." Danny took a deep breath. This was it. 6 weeks of work, countless hours of analysis and preparation, all coming down to this moment. He looked around at his team, at the Valori engineers who had trusted them enough to try something new, at the observers watching to see if the impossible was about to happen. "All right," Danny said. "Let's light this candle. Bring power online to Node 1. Lisa activated the first quantum node. It came alive with soft blue light, energy flowing through its crystalline structure. The displays showed